Continuing now with The Final Days by Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein. At the end of the last session, we left off in the middle of chapter 14 with Nixon and Kissinger secretly formulating a plan to escalate the war in 1969. At the same time that that Kissinger was opening up secret peace negotiations with North Vietnam. As the president paid more attention to the war and spent more and more time reviewing options, Kissinger's influence grew. He fought to bring most major state and Defense Department decisions through the National Security Council. That gave him absolute control over the paperwork, which in turn increased his control over more and more of the president's meetings. Kissinger was more willing to do the president's bidding than were Secretary of State Rogers and Defense Secretary Melvin R. Laird. He asked how, not why. If the president wanted a plan that included the most minute details of conducting an all-out war in Southeast Asia, Kissinger came up with it. If Nixon decided to shelve the plan and send Kissinger secretly to Paris to negotiate peace, Kissinger did it. Nixon's inconstancy, combined with Kissinger's unwillingness to take a stand, confused Kissinger's staff. There was no apparent policy. The president seemed to change his mind so often and in such extreme ways. Nixon is a man who can't be pushed too far, Kissinger warned his associates. Those who looked for more evidence to corroborate Kissinger's portrait of the president found it. Almost from the beginning, Kissinger had secretly had all his telephone calls, including those with the president, monitored and transcribed. The conversations gave Kissinger's assistants enough information about the president to alarm them. Nixon rambled. He made thoughtless remarks and suggestions about people and policy. He sometimes slurred his words as if he had been drinking heavily. His ignorance of important subjects suggested he was lazy and unprepared for the kinds of decisions which require thoughtful consideration. His nasty references about the inferior intelligence of blacks revealed a deep prejudice. Like Kissinger's personal view of Nixon, the existence of Kissinger's clandestine monitoring system was a zealously guarded secret. The practice had begun simply enough in 1969, with a secretary listening to each of Kissinger's phone calls and transcribing in shorthand. A special switch enabled the secretaries in Kissinger's office to deactivate the microphone on their telephone extensions. Early in 1970, the system became more elaborate, and Kissinger began tape recording his telephone calls. An IBM Dictabelt machine, housed in the credenza behind his secretary's desk and hooked into his telephone, was automatically activated when the telephone receiver was picked up. Eventually, several Dictabelt machines were plugged into the phone system, ensuring that there were always standby recorders if one failed or ran out of tape. Kissinger took the monitoring very seriously. There were to be no slip-ups. Diane Matthews, one of the secretaries, was assigned to watch the Dictabelt carefully and signal one of the other women in the office to take shorthand notes if the belt ran out in mid-conversation. Kissinger's appointments secretary, or Haig, also listened regularly to important calls and took notes, especially if the conversations were with the president. On some calls, excuse me. On some calls, the unsuspecting party might be talking simultaneously to Kissinger, Haig, a transcribing secretary, and the appointments secretary. In his basement office in the White House, 8 other phones were connected to Kissinger's direct line with Nixon to facilitate monitoring and transcribing. Haig rigidly enforced the rule that each day's calls be transcribed and typed before the secretaries went home at night, until eventually a special night crew of secretaries was assigned the task of finishing the transcribing. Only Kissinger's most personal calls with Nancy McGinnis, whom he later married, escaped transcription. A footnote adds, the secretaries listened to her calls, however, and sometimes took notes. In case mention was made of a social engagement, Kissinger often forgot such things. Okay, let me back up. That's all one sentence. The secretaries listened to her calls, Nancy's calls, however, and sometimes took notes in case mention was made of a social engagement. Kissinger often forgot such things. The staff's duties included handling his personal finances and his social schedule. Nixon was often on the phone with Kissinger for 15 minutes or longer. The president was repetitive, sometimes taking minutes to come to a point, or he might suddenly shift to another topic without finishing whatever he had been discussing. If a conversation was especially important, Haig usually rushed out of his office, saying to the secretaries, "Can we get that right away?" Kissinger occasionally came out of his office after such calls. "Who was taking that?" he would ask. One of the four women stationed in the small outer office would raise her hand. "Wasn't that the worst thing you ever heard in your life?" Kissinger would ask. Before the secretary nodded assent, Kissinger would turn, shake his head, and grumble to himself. During one call, the president drunkenly related to Dr. Kissinger the Vietnam military policy of his friend Bibi Rebozo. Kissinger told his aides about the call, and for a while thereafter, Haig referred to Nixon as our drunken friend. During another call, Kissinger mentioned the number of American casualties in a major battle in Vietnam. "Oh, screw 'em," said Nixon. Kissinger took care to see that complete transcripts of his calls with the president were preserved in the personal records being accumulated for his memoirs. Eventually, he became so concerned about the security of his papers and files that he moved some of the most sensitive to Rockefeller's Pocantico Hills estate. He intimated to associates that he feared Haldeman and Ehrlichman might try to steal them. When a legal advisor reminded him that it was against the law to store classified documents outside government facilities, Kissinger had the files returned to the White House. Despite his personal assessment of the president, the forces both of Kissinger's personality and of circumstance combined to establish gradually the relationship he desired with Nixon. Kissinger's closest aides were more than familiar with his fundamental approach to dealing with Nixon. He had genuine respect for the president's tough view of what American foreign policy should be, and he appealed to it directly, providing the intellectual framework and negotiating skill to make it operational. The Russians, the Chinese, and the communists of Southeast Asia must all be made to believe, Kissinger insisted, that the United States was willing to escalate the war in Southeast Asia far beyond existing parameters if America were to achieve its objectives. By the spring of 1970, Nixon, Kissinger, and the NSC staff faced a crisis. Cambodia was being used as a staging area by communist troops. The possibility of invasion was discussed, and an invasion plan was developed. Many of the liberal academics on Kissinger's staff, among them Morton H. Halperin, Anthony Lake, and William Watts, were strongly opposed. "Don't worry about it," Haig advised them. "The old man will never go through with this. I've seen him come up to these decisions and then back away." But the president did give his approval. Haig was elated. The others weren't. Kissinger called them his bleeding hearts. Watts went to see Kissinger alone to state his objections. "Your view represents the cowardice of the Eastern establishment," Kissinger told him. Furious, Watts got up out of his chair and moved towards Kissinger. He was going to punch him. Kissinger moved quickly behind his desk. He was not serious, he said. Watts, whose selection as an NSC aide coordinating the Cambodian invasion had just been approved by the president, resigned. "You've just had an order from your commander-in-chief," Haig said. Watts could not resign. "Fuck you, Al," Watts said. "I just did." Excuse the language. Kissinger called his staff together in the executive office building to plead for their support of the decision. "We are all the president's men," he said, "and we've got to behave that way." America's willingness to expand the war in Southeast Asia was also evidenced in secret diplomatic threats and by American bombers. Kissinger could control the president on such issues as the bombing of Cambodia, he boasted to his aides. And by assuming a posture designed to appeal to Nixon's own tough self-image, Kissinger ingratiated himself with the president on other matters. At one point, the Senate Foreign Relations Committee attempted to obtain a copy of the Pentagon Papers months before their existence became publicly known. Haldeman, Ehrlichman, Kissinger, and presidential assistants John Scali and Richard Moore met in Ehrlichman's office. "Refuse the request," Kissinger recommended, by telling them these papers are essential to the national security. Scali demurred. The intimation that Congress could not be entrusted with information that affected the national security might not be too well received on the Hill, he said. He suggested they turn over the papers and avoid a confrontation. Kissinger pronounced Scully's position a craven policy, and thereupon got up to leave. "Wait a minute, Henry," said Haldeman. "We haven't finished discussing this yet." "Well, I have," said Kissinger. "I know what our president will do." He walked out of the meeting. The bureaucratic walls which had barricaded Kissinger from Nixon fell slowly but steadily. As the pressure of events drew the president and Kissinger closer, Kissinger became increasingly alienated from many of his own staff. Some who were disillusioned with both the Kissinger policies and his personality left his service, convinced that the problem was as much Kissinger as the president. He seemed to thrive on trouble, hysteria, fright, uncertainty. He raged at the secretaries. He appeared to take pleasure in humiliating his aides, once excluding his ranking deputy, Helmut Sonnenfeld, from a ceremonial picture-taking session with the words, "Not you, Hal, you're not important enough." He made appointments with reporters and visiting academics, then accused his assistants of overscheduling. Coleman Hicks, one of a series of appointment secretaries who quit, became so frustrated that he had Kissinger approve all appointments in writing. "You have indicated you want to see the following people, and they will be scheduled if you want," said a memo form devised for the purpose. "Please check the appropriate box, approve or disapprove." But even when Hicks pulled out the appropriate memo with Kissinger's check marks beside the names of unwelcome visitors, Kissinger accused him of keeping him from important business by haphazard scheduling. Kissinger seemed singularly obsessed with his own prestige and image. If he had a long list of telephone messages, he would often call back Nancy McGinnis first, then Governor Rockefeller, then movie stars and celebrities, and then the president. He was enormously sensitive to criticism in the press. He assigned his aides the distasteful job of heading off negative stories and lodging complaints about those that made it into print. The job was especially difficult because the offending stories were often true. Kissinger himself was at times the unwitting source. He let information slip as he courted many of Washington's most influential journalists. Kissinger counseled his aides that deviousness was part of their job. "You systems analysis people have too much integrity," he told one of them. "This is not an honorable excuse me. "You systems analysis people have too much integrity," he told one of them. "This is not an honorable business conducted by honorable men in an honorable way. Don't assume I'm that way and you shouldn't be." If an aide was particularly sensitive to deviousness, Kissinger would try to lighten the impact of some of his starker deceptions by making jokes about his own methodology and his disinclination to give the same version of events twice in a row. On occasion, he expressed enthusiasm at the size of the bomb craters that American B-52s left in North Vietnam, and he once bragged to Elliot Richardson that they would quote, reduce Le Duc Tho to tears. When Anthony Lake, his executive assistant, questioned the bombing policies, Kissinger ridiculed him. In a long discussion that grew heated, Kissinger said that Lake's approach to the war was, quote, not manly enough. Lake was so upset by the conversation that he went into a hallway in the West Wing and pounded the vending machines with his fists. Haig talked him out of quitting on that occasion and on one other, but Lake did soon resign. And in a footnote they add, Lake was one of the aides whose telephones were secretly tapped with the approval of both Kissinger and Haig. In 1973, when Lake learned of the tap, he phoned Kissinger to discuss the matter. Kissinger said he knew nothing about the tape, paused, and added, in any detail. Kissinger's inability to manage either personal relationships or staff organization, he couldn't even recognize his own senior staff members on the street, Coleman Hicks once remarked, became an accepted fact of life in the White House basement. It was Haig who kept things running smoothly, walking a tightrope between the staff and Kissinger and between Kissinger and the Oval Office. Haig managed the paper flow. He worked longer hours than anyone else in the office. He insulated the staff from Kissinger's wrath. He knew the cable traffic perfectly. He was gregarious, personable, likable. He wore a dinner jacket as comfortably as an army uniform. He assiduously avoided the intellectual and ideological debates which scarred the NSC staff. He tolerated with superhuman strength the abuse that Kissinger heaped on him. Only someone schooled in taking shit could put up with it, Hicks observed to his colleagues. In Haig's presence, Kissinger referred pointedly to military men as, quote, dumb, stupid animals to be used as pawns for foreign policy. Kissinger often took up a post outside the doorway to Haig's office and dressed him down in front of the secretaries for alleged acts of incompetence with which Haig was not even remotely involved. Once, when the Air Force was authorized to resume bombing of North Vietnam, the planes did not fly on certain days because of bad weather. Kissinger assailed Haig. He complained bitterly that the generals had been screaming for the limits to be taken off, but that now their pilots were afraid to go up in a little fog. The country needed generals who could win battles, Kissinger said, not good briefers like Haig. On another occasion, when Haig was leaving for a trip to Cambodia to meet with Premier Lon Nol, Kissinger escorted him to a staff car where reporters and a retinue of aides waited. As Haig bent to get into his automobile, Kissinger stopped him and began polishing the single star on his shoulder. "Al, if you're a good boy, I'll get you another one," he said. Haig bore silently any resentment he felt. He had always been able to avoid friction with his superiors. In the Johnson administration, his tireless work and smooth, easy manner had impressed his influential bosses at the Pentagon, Joseph Califano and Army Secretary Cyrus Vance. Haig had come highly recommended to Kissinger, who had installed him in the White House basement as his military aide at the start of the Nixon administration. One of Haig's early assignments was to prepare the daily NSC intelligence report, which was based on vast amounts of information that flowed into the White House Situation Room. His access to virtually every piece of intelligence that reached the White House was unique, and he quickly acquired a superior knowledge of each NSC project and component. He handled the immense volume of paperwork adroitly, sometimes placing his own memos on top of the stacks that went to Kissinger. As he became more confident, he sometimes rewrote memos submitted to Kissinger by other members of the staff. On other occasions, he sent memos back to their authors with instructions that Kissinger wanted them done differently. No one knew for sure if the desired revisions reflected the preference of the president, Kissinger, or Haig. As Haig asserted his growing managerial role on the staff, others who saw themselves as the brightest stars in the Kissinger constellation of aides were eclipsed. Though some resented Haig, few questioned his authority. He had complete access to Kissinger, and Haig assured his colleagues that he was acting in their own interests. If it happened rarely that sometimes balked at having his memo rewritten, Haig would explain that he was merely tailoring it to suit the idiosyncrasies of its recipient. It was better for all concerned, said Haig, that he deal with those shits, Kissinger, Haldeman, Colson, and the rest. He claimed no political ambitions. "I've got to get out of here," he would remind Kissinger's civilian aides, "back into the real army, away from this temporary duty that could only screw up his military career." Still, the key to Haig's ascent was Kissinger, because Haig was almost indispensable to him. He provided order, discipline, predictability. Without Haig, there would be chaos. Pure military decisions bored Kissinger. Haig handled them for him. He served as the NSC liaison to the Pentagon brass and kept their feathers unruffled. "I'd invite you to this meeting, but the Army doesn't have anything at stake here," Kissinger would half joke. Among Kissinger's principal aides, Haig alone stayed on after the Cambodian invasion, and in June 1970 he was formally appointed as Kissinger's deputy. Though Kissinger was wary of granting any aide too much power, he was convinced he could control Haig. Haig was loyal, at least the most loyal of Kissinger's subordinates. "It is clear that I don't have anybody in my office that I can trust except Colonel Haig," Kissinger told a senior FBI official in 1969 as he reviewed the wiretapped conversations of several other aides. Richard Nixon was also an admirer. If the president stopped by the NSC office and found Kissinger gone, he would sit talking with Haig. Sometimes Nixon called Haig to his office to discuss military questions, which Kissinger was unable to answer or which he had bucked to his deputy. Nixon began to test Haig, making vague negative comments about Kissinger, expressing concern that Henry was off on his own or that he was not following policies and procedures they had agreed upon. He wanted Haig's opinion. Delicately, Haig managed to defend Kissinger, at the same time making it clear that his ultimate loyalty was to the president. Kissinger began to be obsessed about what Haig and Nixon said to each other when they were alone. Kissinger regarded himself as a conservative in foreign policy matters, but Haig, he observed, was a right-winger. And Kissinger was concerned that Haig might establish a private relationship with the president that would diminish his own influence over Nixon in foreign affairs. Gradually, Kissinger concluded that he had handed Haig too much power. Haig was devious, duplicitous, he sometimes said now. Kissinger worried that Haig spied on him for the Pentagon and worse, for the president. Kissinger's insecurities concerning his deputy finally reached such a pitch that he called in one of his secretaries, Julie Pineau, to ask her who was the most impressive person she had met on the job. Who was the best member of the NSC staff, most competent? He was relieved visibly when she named Winston Lord, a Kissinger favorite. When he was around Kissinger, Haig took great care not to flaunt his relationship with Nixon. He was determined to succeed with both men. To Kissinger and his aides, Haig sometimes referred to the president as an inherently weak man who lacked guts. He joked that Nixon and Bibi Rebozo had a homosexual relationship, imitating what he called the president's limp wrist manner. And around the men he cultivated in the Pentagon and the White House, Haig implied that Kissinger was too often the barrier to definitive military action. He complained about Kissinger's temper tantrums, his dishonesty, his disorganization, his reluctance to offend the weak-livered eggheads he had associated with in academia. These men thought Haig trusted them because he was willing to share such harsh judgments with them. As the negotiations to end the war in Vietnam progressed, relations between Kissinger and Haig almost disintegrated. Nixon sent Haig to Southeast Asia to make independent appraisals of the military situation. Haig was the president's line to the battlefield. Returning, Haig argued successfully that the American withdrawal of troops should be conducted at a pace slower than that recommended by Kissinger. Kissinger felt that he had been undermined. Nixon sent Haig to Paris to observe Kissinger's bargaining with the North Vietnamese, and Haig counseled the president to take a harder line than Kissinger was pursuing at the bargaining table. Kissinger reacted with alarm and fury. Neither military nor diplomatic realities justified Haig's position, Kissinger said. The arguments grew heated and personal. Kissinger was certain that Haig's intervention was making a settlement more difficult, particularly the settlement the president himself wanted, one which could be announced before Election Day 1972. On October 26th, less than 2 weeks before the election, Kissinger was able to announce that peace, quote, peace is at hand, and that terms for a settlement had been agreed upon. When the prospect of settlement collapsed after the election, he blamed Haig. Kissinger was nearly certain that Haig, during his travels to Southeast Asia, had persuaded Vietnam President Thieu to hold out for better terms than Kissinger had negotiated. In December 1972, while Kissinger was negotiating in Paris, Nixon was closeted at the White House with Haig and Charles Colson. The peace talks were deadlocked. Both men told him Kissinger was once more taking too soft a negotiating position. The options cabled back to Washington by Kissinger included resumption of bombing in the North. Haig urged the president to take decisive action to finally bring the North Vietnamese to their knees. Nixon weighed his choices and acted. Haig informed John Scully of the president's decision. This man is going to stand tall and resume the bombing and put those B-52 mothers in there and show them we mean business. And I am going to stop there. We've got a few pages left in chapter 14, and we're at the 23-minute mark, so I'll stop right there. So we'll resume in the next session. We'll resume and finish with the final days by Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein, and we'll finish chapter 14 and then move on into chapter 15. Thank you for watching.